welcome back. So this part of the course, which is the final part of our sort of startup strategy element, is really focusing on something called strategy frameworks. And we'll dive into a little bit more about what that means in a second. But what I really want you to take from this video is the fact that this is called strategy frameworks. And so essentially it's inherent and it should be obvious or hopefully understandable that there's a difference between what we term as startup strategy and then general strategy. And quite often there is this difference between startup strategy and corporate strategy, because one of the things you might say is that, well, the company that I currently work for, we have a strategy team. And so can't I just take the ideas and understand the ideas that they're using and try to implement them in my business? Well, absolutely you can, if you have a business which is off the ground, up and running, has customers already, has a cost base, and understands that it's got a product in the market that somebody wants to buy, is willing to buy. And then off the back of that, you're looking at how can you grow your business? How can you go into new markets? How can you remove cost from the business? But before we get there, there needs to be a certain element. And this element is the startup strategy part that I've been banging on about as we're going through. So we're initially starting from a point where we're in an environment of what Eric Ries would describe in the Lean Startup of extreme uncertainty. We don't know that somebody wants that product. Now, if you're working for a larger company or any company whatsoever that has a fair few employees, then you already know that this is a company which has something to sell and has a client base that's willing and able to afford that product or service. And so the focus of their part within strategy is much more around this idea of how can we grow our business? How can we move our business into different jurisdictions, into different geographies, into different markets? How can we create some new revenue lines? How can we make more profit from existing revenue lines? And so what I want to do, and this is probably more for those who are a bit more interested in this element of strategy, which would be that next part of your business. So the startup strategy is really around us building from 0 to 1, building from idea or concept to something that's tangible that we can actually try to take to market. That's what startup strategy is really about. The 0 to 1 of startup strategy is about taking that idea that we have and looking to test that with the market. Strategy frameworks as such focuses much more on what's essentially known in the world more as corporate strategy. And we'll go into a couple of frameworks that have been used for years and are still used today to help companies understand their particular positioning within a market and what they might likely do in certain business situations in which they might find themselves. So the first one that I'd like to look at is profitability framework, and the second one that we'll go on to is a market entry framework. So the way that I think that startups can use these frameworks is essentially trying to break down a problem. So these frameworks, yes, we'll dive into what a profitability framework might be and what a market entry framework looks like. But what I really want you to take out of this, as I mentioned previously, number one is the startup strategy element and how that differs to what we'll see in these frameworks. But two, take the approach to solving problems. And so what a framework does is it allows you to break down quite a large and sometimes complex problem into its component parts. And then once you start to solve for each of the component parts, you often come to the answer to your original larger and more complex question. And so what I would definitely say is make sure that what you're taking from this is what's the approach that these frameworks take to trying to solve a particular issue. Now, let's dive into the example so that what I'm saying has a little bit more meat to the bone and doesn't just focus on something fairly theoretical. So where is a potential area or problem that a company might come across, right? Let's say that we're looking at the profit of company A over the past 2 or 3 years, and we see that the profit is slowly going down. One of the easiest questions to ask, but perhaps one of the hardest to answer, is why is that profit going down? Now, in order for us to know why profit is going down, we need to understand what profit is made of. It's made up of your revenue, i.e., what cash is coming into the business, what you're making, minus the costs. So what's going out of your business? Okay, that makes a fair amount of sense. But then what about if we break down into, well, what is revenue? So revenue is the price of your service or of your product times by the number of that product that you sell. And so previously we were talking about apples. And so we could say the price per unit for that apple is, we're going to sell the apples at £1 and we'll sell 10 of those apples. Well, that gives us a revenue of £10. And so we know that actually that's how much revenue, that's how much cash we're going to bring in the door if we've sold 10 apples worth £1. On the other side then, in order for us to get to our profit figure, we need to take out all the costs that we have. But then the question is, well, what is cost made up of? Well, costs can be made up of two types of costs. We've got what's called fixed costs and variable costs. So what would a fixed cost be? A fixed cost is essentially looking at a cost that you're going to incur, let's say on a monthly basis, i.e. a regular occurrence, that doesn't change with the quantity of the good, product, or service that you sell. Now, what would be an example of this would be something like your office space. So your office space, you'll rent that space. And so you might rent that space and it's got space for 5 people in there. And you could sell 100 apples or you could sell 5 apples, but you're going to have to pay the same amount of rent every single month, whether you sell 100 or whether you sell 5 apples or whether you sell nothing. So that is a fixed cost that you will always be having to spend. Let's keep with the example of apples. Let's say that these apples need to go into crates though, right? And so in each crate, we can fit 5 apples. So if we're looking at variable costs now, these are costs that vary with the amount that we sell of a particular good. So let's say that each crate holds 5 apples. Well, if we sell 100 apples, then if each crate is holding 5 apples, then it's going to be 20 crates that we need to buy. If we only sell 5 apples, then we only need 1 crate. And so what that essentially means is that as the number of apples, as the number of goods or the service that we offer increases, i.e. we get more sales, there's also a cost element to that as well that increases because you might have increased packaging, for example. And so what we're looking at there, when we're looking at that profitability element, we're saying, well, we know that it's made up of revenue and cost, and we know that revenue is made up of the price per unit times by the number that we're going to sell, and cost is made up of our fixed costs and then variable costs. And what we can start to see is we can break all of this down and then try to work out, oh, well, over the years, what is it that's decreasing? Well, we can see that our revenue is increasing, and our revenue is increasing because we're selling more and we're keeping it the same price. So it can't be that our revenue is going down and therefore our profit is going down. Well, actually, it's our revenue is going up. So why is our profit going down? Well, the more we dig into it and we go into cost, well, we might find that the variable cost, i.e. in our example, the cost for a crate that we need to hold those apples, well, that cost might be exactly the same, i.e. per unit. And so what we're essentially saying is, well, it's not variable cost because the crates are all exactly the same. And as we sell more, we're going to buy more crates, but we're actually making more revenue. But then when you look a little bit deeper and you might look at the fixed costs and you say, well, actually, the rent here has tripled since we've been there. So each month we're paying triple the amount of rent that we were supposed to pay for this, or that we were originally paying for this office space. And so your answer to the question of why is profit going down is actually because your fixed costs are too high. And so the answer off the back of that, where you should focus on is, let's look for a different office space or something that might be a bit more convenient. Could we do some more remote working? And so what this framework allows you to do is to sit down and take one particular question and really drill down as far as you can to understand where the problem really lies. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because indeed it's helpful to understand just on a general perspective where this profit figure is coming from. And again, we can use Excel for all of this, as you'd have seen in the previous video and what we were talking about before. But really the point here is that strategy can be taken even further than just the startup strategy. And so corporate strategy is seen as in different ways. And obviously this gets even more complex because you might not be selling one good. You might have lots and lots of different line items of what you're selling. And this generally tends to be a large organization, right? then the question of why is profit decreasing or why is it increasing indeed, and what can we do to make it increase even more is obviously at the forefront, and we need to dig deeper into that profit figure to try and work out where it is that's either driving our profit up or indeed pulling it back. And so this is one way that we can really look at it. But the key point to take is that what these frameworks allow you to do, or in some sense push you towards, is to actually come up with a much more focused way of trying to answer a question. So this is just one way of that you can tailor your thinking, try to look at certain frameworks that are out there that can allow you to structure your thinking and trying to get to the root cause of a problem. So that's one example, and hopefully that's helpful. Another one might be a company is looking to get into a particular market. Now, larger organizations might use this, would likely use this when they're coming to think of what are all the factors I need to consider if I'm going to take my business from geography A. Let's say I'm only focused on working in Europe, and now I want to work in the US as well, or I want to go and work in another country. Now, these are questions that lots of larger corporate firms will come across. But indeed, if we're looking at 0 to 1 and saying, yeah, idea, how can we take this particular framework and implement it? So let's have a look. Let's say that we're a company that's a larger company that's looking to go into a new market. We're working in Germany, and then we want to work in another European country, and we're not sure whether it should be France, Italy, Spain, the UK, Greece, etc. And so what we want to do is collect a lot of information that will help us get to a logical and appropriate answer to this. And so one of the first things that we might want to look at is the particular market. Let's say we're selling apples again. Then what we might want to do is have a look at that market and say, okay, well, how large is the market for apples across Europe? Where are we seeing most of the demand? Where are lots of apples bought in the world? The second one might be more on the competitive landscape. Okay, so it might be a huge market, let's say in Italy, but actually there are so many other players in that market that it doesn't make sense for us to go in there. The third one might be, what are our own capabilities? What's our unfair advantage? So for example, if we've got a company and we're looking to sell in France or potentially Italy, and our capabilities are, let's look from a language perspective, that actually we have lots of people in the organization that can speak Italian, no one who can speak French. Well, then we're looking at our own capabilities and trying to weigh up, perhaps Italy would be a more interesting or a more natural option for us. Perhaps it might be something around the regulation of what you particularly understand. Maybe you have certain connections in a particular country. The next one is then financials. So these final two are probably less focused on startups and side hustles as such. This is more for your large organizations. They would be having a look at the investment that they've taken on. Have we got the financials in place whereby we would be able to enter this market at a fairly low cost? So do we need to hire more people once we enter this market, or once we're into that market, what are the running costs? What's the tax implications of moving into that particular market? And so you've got to really have an understanding of your financial situation as a company as to whether it's viable or not to move into that particular market and what those implications are going to be. And this final area is around entry strategy. So should you enter this market alone? If we're in Germany and we're looking to go into Italy, Spain, France to sell more apples, should we just set up our own entity in Italy and then sell apples? Should we partner with someone and then through them have a joint venture where we both sell perhaps we supply the apples and then there's a company in Italy that then distribute the apples? Or indeed, if you're a really large organization, you might want to buy, or what we call an acquisition. You might want to acquire a firm in that country. So hopefully I haven't gone off on a little bit of a tangent there when we're looking at larger organizations, but that's just something to bear in mind as to how large organizations would use this. What I really want you to focus on though is here. So the market, the competitive landscape and the capabilities, this sort of thinking is what you should really be thinking when you're looking at your idea. I've got a business idea and I want to take it from 0 to 1. And once you're starting to get that idea of what it is, then you can start to look at that market. Is it an attractive market to be in? How fast is it growing? What's the profitability element of that particular market? The next thing you want to know is who are the competitors? So if I am to launch a business in a particular market, if it's in e-learning, or even if it's a small sort of a small recruitment firm, I want to build a social media brand, I want to sell products on Etsy, for example. I want to build my own products or create something quite sort of artsy and craftsy and sell that on an e-commerce website. Well, what are you looking to sell? Let's say you're really focusing on trying to sell your coaching business. You're trying to coach skills in fitness. So you might be looking at what's the size of that fitness market, and who are the main competitors at the moment in your particular niche. So we know that through the lean startup and design thinking, we're really going as niche as we can because we're trying to create a sort of MVP that's focused on that particular market. Well, who are those competitors that are working in that market at the moment? And what's the structure of that? As in, are they holding all of the market? Are they not? And the question is, how do you get that information? Well, you can simply search for it. So if you're looking to sell something on Instagram and it's your fitness business on Instagram, well, have a look at others who are in, perhaps you're focusing on those in your particular city at that particular time, who are from a specific demographic. Well, have a look on Google. Are there people around who are already offering this? Are people on Instagram? Are they on TikTok? If they are, what's their following? And you can start to collate this data. Where can we hold this data? In Excel, which we've done before, or in your Google Sheets. And you can start to then start to see, okay, well, we can see actually the market is quite saturated, which means that there's a lot of people there, or it's not very saturated. There aren't that many competitors there, and it could be something of interest. And the final part that I really want you to focus on is capabilities. Now, just as a company might have certain capabilities that make them put them into a different position than others, you also have that as well. What's your unfair advantage, right? When I was starting the interner, one of the unfair advantages that I had, and the interner, as you'll have heard before in the introduction as well, which is the main initial business of the interner before we moved more into the e-learning space as well, and it still exists today, is connecting interns from the UK, i.e. students who are going on a placement year, generally on their year abroad, to startups across Europe. The unfair advantage I had was that I was a placement year student myself. I was lucky enough to do a year abroad, and I worked in a startup in Europe. So I'd completely lived the same problem that I was trying to solve, and also the solution that I was then going to offer. So I was in this position whereby I'd completely understood the process from start to finish because I'd lived it and I'd seen it for myself. And secondly, because I'd gone, for example, to Italy to work for a startup, that meant that, number one, I could then speak Italian, which was another differentiator. And also, having worked for a startup whose goal was to help startups in Italy, it meant that I automatically had access to a network over in Italy through that particular startup that I'd worked with. And similarly, I'd already had the connections through the university because I was still at university at the time when I started the interner. And so when I was looking at it, it was like, what capabilities do I have that give me a particular unfair advantage? And there's nothing wrong with an unfair advantage. Try to work out what yours is and then implement that in your business. So I hope that those frameworks were helpful to understand. Again, I think that just wrapping up on this part, the core elements that I want you to take from this is that there is a difference, in my opinion, between startup strategy and corporate strategy. Startup strategy, we're in an environment of extreme uncertainty. We don't know whether somebody wants that product. We don't know whether we're solving a particular problem, but we're going out to find out whether that problem exists. And if our solution fits that problem, and if it does, then we can start to iterate and move forward and actually then create our business from that. On the other hand, when you're looking at things like corporate strategy, you already know somebody out there wants to buy the product. There's an existing client base. And so that means that you can really start to focus on other things that are going to drive your business forward. But if we're looking at why I've included strategy frameworks in there, it's really to help drive the thinking about your business. Because the more logical you can be around your business decisions, the better. By trying to break down problems, large, complex problems and complex questions, into smaller bite-sized chunks where we're really digging deeper to really find out what the cause of the issue is, or where the problem lies, or where the opportunity lies, that can take us from 0 to 1. It's simply that mindset of having us think, right, can we apply a particular framework to this? Or is there a way of thinking? As we can see here, are there specific bits of information that can help us to differentiate ourselves in the market? Linking that back to blue ocean strategy, are there ways that we can create our unfair advantage and actually start to build on top of that? And so there's a great book called Running Lean, written by Ash Maurya, who talks about this idea of the unfair advantage. And I really think that sits in the capabilities. This is what we have to offer. This is what's really going to differentiate our offer moving forward. And so hopefully what you can see from that is that we're trying to be very hypothesis driven as we were in startup strategy. Could this work? Could it not? Testing that with the market, using data, using information that we've collected, and then finally trying to synthesize that and evaluate it so that we can actually come up with a succinct answer to that question. And of course, if you want to dive in a little bit deeper into the world of strategy, then here are some things that you can go through, and certainly some experts who have arguably conquered the world of strategy.